Jane was a 30-year-old marketing assistant who lived in a small apartment in Maplewood Heights. She had long brown hair and kind green eyes that always seemed to sparkle when she smiled. Most people who met Jane would describe her as the type of person who would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. Jane had been dating her boyfriend, Ryan, for about 8 months now. Ryan was tall with blonde hair and worked as a sales manager at a car dealership downtown. When they first started dating, Jane thought she had hit the jackpot. Ryan was charming, funny, and always knew exactly what to say to make her feel special. He would bring her flowers on random Tuesday afternoons and text her sweet messages throughout the day. Their relationship started like something out of a fairy tale. Ryan had approached Jane at a coffee shop where she was working on her laptop. He had complimented her laptop stickers and asked what she was working on. Before she knew it, they were talking for 2 hours straight about everything from their favorite movies to their biggest dreams. Ryan had this way of making Jane feel like she was the only person in the world when he looked at her. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Ryan would pick Jane up from work sometimes and surprise her with her favorite chocolate chip cookies from the bakery near her office. They would spend weekends exploring new restaurants in the city or having movie marathons in Jane's cozy living room. Jane's friends all seemed to love Ryan too. He was polite to everyone and always offered to help with things like moving furniture or fixing broken appliances. Jane started to imagine a future with Ryan. She would daydream about them getting married someday, maybe buying a house together in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Max. She had even started a secret Pinterest board filled with wedding dress ideas and home decoration inspiration. When her sister asked her if she thought Ryan might be the one, Jane would blush and say she hoped so. But then things started to change in small ways that Jane didn't notice at first. Ryan began taking longer to respond to her text messages. When she would ask him about his day, his answers became shorter and less detailed. He started canceling their weekend plans more often, usually with excuses about having to work late or help a friend with something important. Jane tried not to worry too much about these changes. She told herself that maybe Ryan was just going through a stressful time at work. After all, he had mentioned that his boss had been putting more pressure on the sales team lately. She didn't want to be the type of girlfriend who was clingy or demanding, so she decided to give him some space and be understanding. One evening, Jane decided to do something special for Ryan to show him how much she cared. She spent her entire Saturday afternoon cooking his favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs with garlic bread. She even went to 3 different stores to find the specific brand of Parmesan cheese that he liked best. She set up candles on her dining table and put on soft music to create a romantic atmosphere. When Ryan arrived at her apartment that night, he seemed distracted and kept checking his phone during dinner. Jane had spent hours preparing everything perfectly, but Ryan barely seemed to notice. He ate quickly and kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere else to be. When Jane asked if everything was okay, Ryan just shrugged and said he was tired. After dinner, Jane suggested they watch a movie together on the couch, like they used to do. But Ryan said he had an early morning meeting and needed to go home to get some rest. Jane felt disappointed, but tried to hide it. She kissed him goodnight and told him she loved him, but Ryan's response felt rushed and automatic. The next week, Jane noticed that Ryan had become even more distant. He would often be on his phone when they were together, typing messages with a small smile on his face that he never seemed to have when he was talking to her. When Jane asked who he was texting, Ryan would quickly put his phone away and say it was just work stuff or his buddy from college. Jane started to feel like she was losing her mind. She wondered if she was being paranoid or if there was really something wrong with their relationship. She considered talking to her best friend about it, but she was embarrassed to admit that things might not be as perfect as she had been telling everyone. One Thursday evening, Jane decided to surprise Ryan at his apartment with takeout from his favorite Chinese restaurant. She had been feeling disconnected from him lately and hoped that spending some unplanned time together might help them get back to how things used to be. When Jane arrived at Ryan's building, She used the spare key he had given her a few months earlier. She climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, carrying bags of sweet and sour chicken and beef lo mein. She was excited to see the surprised look on his face when she walked through the door. But as Jane approached Ryan's apartment, she could hear voices coming from inside. She recognized Ryan's laugh, but there was another voice too, a woman's voice that Jane didn't recognize. The woman was giggling about something, and Jane could hear Ryan saying something that made her laugh even harder. Jane stood frozen outside the door, her heart starting to beat faster. She told herself that it was probably just a friend or maybe his sister visiting from out of town. But something about the way Ryan was laughing, so carefree and happy, made Jane's stomach twist into knots. She slowly turned the key in the lock, trying to be as quiet as possible. As she pushed the door open, just a crack, Jane could see into Ryan's living room. What she saw made her drop the bags of Chinese food right there on the floor. Ryan was sitting on his couch with a beautiful redhead woman that Jane had never seen before. The woman was wearing a tight black dress and had her hand resting on Ryan's leg. But what made Jane's heart shatter into a million pieces was seeing Ryan lean over and kiss this stranger passionately, like he had kissed Jane so many times before. Jane felt like she couldn't breathe. Her legs became weak, and she had to grab onto the door frame to keep herself from falling down. The Chinese food containers had burst open when they hit the floor, and now there was sweet and sour sauce splattered all over the hallway carpet. But Jane barely noticed the mess. All she could focus on was the scene playing out in front of her. The redhead woman was now running her fingers through Ryan's hair, and he was whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. It was the same laugh Jane had heard from outside the door, but now it felt like nails on a chalkboard. Ryan looked happier and more relaxed than Jane had seen him in weeks. Jane wanted to storm into the apartment and confront them both right then and there. She wanted to scream at Ryan and ask him how he could do this to her after everything they had shared together. She wanted to demand answers and make him explain why he had been lying to her face for who knows how long. But instead, Jane found herself backing away from the door as quietly as she could. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely get the key back into her purse. She felt like she was going to throw up, and her vision was getting blurry from the tears that were starting to form in her eyes. Jane stumbled back down the stairs and out of Ryan's building. She sat in her car for what felt like hours, just staring at the steering wheel and trying to process what she had just witnessed. Every happy memory she had with Ryan now felt like a lie. Every time he had told her he loved her, every future plan they had made together, it all felt fake and meaningless now. When Jane finally drove home, she went straight to her bedroom and collapsed on her bed. She cried until her eyes were red and puffy, and her pillow was soaked with tears. She kept replaying the image of Ryan kissing that other woman over and over in her mind, and each time it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. The next morning, Jane woke up hoping that everything had just been a terrible nightmare. But when she looked at her phone, she saw 3 missed calls from Ryan and several text messages asking where she was and if she was okay. Jane stared at his messages for a long time, wondering how he could act so concerned about her when he was cheating on her with someone else. Jane decided not to respond to Ryan's messages right away. She needed time to figure out what she was going to do and how she was going to handle this situation. She called in sick to work and spent the day walking around her neighborhood, trying to clear her head and make sense of her emotions. As Jane walked past the park where she and Ryan used to have picnics on Sunday afternoons, she started to feel something besides sadness. She was beginning to feel angry, really angry. How dare Ryan make her feel like she was going crazy when she had suspected something was wrong? How dare he lie to her face and pretend to care about her while he was sneaking around with another woman? That evening, Jane decided to do some investigating. She remembered that Ryan had left his laptop at her apartment a few weeks ago and had never come back to get it. Jane had been meaning to remind him about it, but now she was curious about what she might find on it. Jane opened Ryan's laptop and was surprised to find that he hadn't logged out of his social media accounts. As she scrolled through his messages, Jane discovered that Ryan had been talking to several different women online. There were flirty conversations with at least 5 different girls, and some of the messages were very inappropriate. But what made Jane's blood boil was finding a group chat that Ryan was part of with his friends from college. In this chat, Ryan had been bragging about how he was playing the field and keeping multiple women interested at the same time. He had even shared photos that Jane had sent him privately, along with comments about her appearance that made her feel sick to her stomach. One message from Ryan particularly stood out to Jane. He had written, "Jane is so gullible. She believes everything I tell her. She's been cooking for me and doing my laundry like a perfect little housewife while I've been having fun with other girls. It's honestly too easy." Jane stared at that message for a long time, feeling a mixture of hurt and rage that she had never experienced before. She realized that Ryan hadn't just cheated on her. He had been using her and making fun of her to his friends the entire time. All of her kindness and love had been treated like a joke. As Jane continued reading through the messages, she discovered that Ryan had been planning to break up with her anyway. He had told his friends that he was getting bored with her and wanted to start dating the redhead woman she had seen at his apartment. He had even joked about how he was going to let Jane down easy by telling her that he needed space to focus on his career. Jane felt like she had been punched in the gut. She had been so worried about their relationship and trying to be the perfect girlfriend, while Ryan had been planning to dump her and move on to someone else. She had been completely blind to his true nature. But then Jane remembered something that made her sit up straighter. Ryan had a big presentation at work next week that he had been stressing about for months. His entire promotion depended on impressing his boss and the company's biggest client. Ryan had told Jane that this presentation could make or break his career at the dealership. Jane looked at Ryan's laptop screen again and noticed that he had saved all of his presentation files in a folder on his desktop. She also saw that he had been using the same password for everything, the name of his childhood dog, followed by his birth year. As Jane stared at all of Ryan's private information spread out in front of her, she began to smile for the first time in days. If Ryan wanted to play games and treat people like they didn't matter, then Jane was going to show him that actions have consequences. She was going to make sure that Ryan learned the hard way that you should never underestimate someone who has been kind to you, because they might just surprise you with how creative they can be when they decide to stop being nice. Jane spent the rest of the night carefully planning her next move. She was done being the victim in this situation. It was time for Ryan to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Jane woke up the next morning with a clear plan in mind. She had spent hours the night before copying all of Ryan's files and messages to her own computer. She now had screenshots of every cruel thing he had said about her, every woman he had been talking to, and most importantly, she had complete access to his work presentation that could make or break his career. The first thing Jane did was create a fake social media account using a random name and photo. She wanted to be able to watch Ryan's life fall apart without him knowing she was behind it. She also made sure to save copies of everything on multiple devices, just in case Ryan figured out what she was doing and tried to delete the evidence. Jane's plan was simple but effective. She was going to expose Ryan's lies and cheating in a way that would humiliate him in front of everyone he cared about. But she wasn't going to do it all at once. Jane wanted Ryan to suffer slowly, just like he had made her suffer with his lies and betrayal. Over the next few days, Jane pretended like nothing had happened. When Ryan called her and asked why she hadn't been returning his messages, Jane told him she had been feeling sick and needed some time to rest. Ryan seemed relieved that she wasn't asking too many questions about where he had been or what he had been doing. Jane even agreed to meet Ryan for dinner at their favorite restaurant on Friday night. She sat across from him, watching him lie to her face about working late and having to help his sick grandmother. Every word that came out of his mouth made Jane angrier, but she kept smiling and nodding like she believed everything he was saying. During dinner, Ryan kept checking his phone and smiling at messages he was receiving. Jane knew he was probably texting the redhead woman or one of his other girlfriends. but she didn't say anything. Instead, she asked Ryan sweetly if he was excited about his big presentation next week. Ryan's eyes lit up when Jane mentioned the presentation. He started talking about how this was his chance to finally get the promotion he had been working toward for 2 years. He explained that if he impressed the client, he would not only get a raise, but also become the youngest sales manager in the company's history. Jane listened to Ryan talk about his dreams and goals, knowing that she was about to destroy every single one of them. She felt a little bit bad for about 2 seconds, but then she remembered the message where he had called her gullible and bragged about using her. Her sympathy disappeared completely. After dinner, Jane went home and began phase 1 of her revenge plan. She started by sending anonymous messages to all of the women Ryan had been talking to online. Jane didn't reveal who she was, but she shared screenshots of Ryan's conversations with other women, showing each girl that she wasn't the only one he was talking to. The responses Jane received were exactly what she had hoped for. Most of the women were shocked and angry to discover that Ryan had been lying to them too. Several of them thanked Jane for opening their eyes and promised to confront Ryan about his dishonesty. Jane also decided to reach out to the redhead woman she had seen at Ryan's apartment. Through some detective work on social media, Jane discovered that her name was Ashley and she worked as a nurse at the hospital downtown. Jane sent Ashley a message explaining that Ryan had been cheating on his girlfriend with her and attached screenshots of him talking about both of them to his friends. Ashley's response came within an hour. She was furious and embarrassed. Ashley had thought she was Ryan's only girlfriend and had even been considering introducing him to her parents. She thanked Jane for telling her the truth and said she was going to make sure Ryan regretted ever lying to her. By Sunday evening, Jane's phone was buzzing with notifications. Ryan had been calling and texting her nonstop, asking if she knew why all of his female friends were suddenly angry with him. Jane pretended to be confused and concerned, asking Ryan if he had done something to upset them. Ryan swore to Jane that he had no idea why everyone was mad at him. He claimed that his ex-girlfriends were probably just jealous that he had moved on with Jane. Jane had to bite her tongue to keep from laughing at how clueless Ryan was about what was happening to him. But Jane was just getting started. Phase 2 of her plan was much more serious and would hit Ryan where it hurt the most, his career and his reputation. Jane knew that Ryan's boss, Mr. Davidson, was very strict about his employees maintaining a professional image. The car dealership had a policy about employees not engaging in behavior that could reflect poorly on the company. Jane also knew that the big client Ryan was trying to impress was a family man who valued honesty and integrity above everything else. Jane spent Monday morning carefully crafting an email that would destroy Ryan's career prospects. She gathered all of the most inappropriate messages Ryan had sent to various women, including the photos he had shared of Jane without her permission. She also included screenshots of him bragging about manipulating women and lying to his girlfriend. But Jane's masterpiece was what she did to Ryan's presentation. She had noticed that Ryan had been working on his slides for weeks and had saved multiple versions on his laptop. Jane carefully edited the final version of his presentation, making subtle changes that would be absolutely devastating during the meeting. Jane changed important sales figures to make them completely wrong. She altered the client's company name in several places, making it look like Ryan hadn't even bothered to research who he was presenting to. She also added a slide near the end that contained some of Ryan's most inappropriate text messages, formatted to look like they were part of the presentation. The changes Jane made were subtle enough that Ryan probably wouldn't notice them if he just glanced at his slides quickly. But they would be obvious and embarrassing when he was standing in front of his boss and the client, trying to give the most important presentation of his career. Jane also made sure to send copies of Ryan's inappropriate messages to several of his coworkers, including the woman who worked in human resources. She used her fake social media account to make it look like a concerned employee was reporting Ryan's behavior. By Tuesday morning, Jane could tell that her plan was starting to work. Ryan looked stressed and exhausted when he picked her up for lunch. He kept complaining about how his co-workers were acting weird around him and how his boss had scheduled a meeting with him and HR for later that week. Jane pretended to be sympathetic and supportive, telling Ryan that she was sure everything would work out fine. She even offered to help him practice his presentation, knowing that he was too proud to accept help and would want to do it alone. Wednesday was the day of Ryan's big presentation. Jane had taken the day off work, so she could be available to watch the fallout. She spent the morning anxiously waiting for news, wondering if her plan would work or if Ryan would somehow figure out what she had done. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Jane's phone rang. It was Ryan, and he was screaming so loudly that Jane had to hold the phone away from her ear. Ryan was furious and confused, demanding to know if Jane had anything to do with what had happened during his presentation. Jane asked Ryan to calm down and explain what was wrong. Through his angry rambling, Jane learned that everything had gone exactly as she had planned. Ryan had discovered the errors in his presentation while he was giving it, but by then it was too late. He had called the client by the wrong name, presented completely incorrect sales figures, and the slide with his inappropriate text messages had appeared right in the middle of his pitch. Ryan's boss had been so embarrassed and angry that he had ended the meeting early and told the client that the company would be in touch later. The client had left looking disgusted and disappointed, and Ryan had been called into his boss's office immediately afterward. Jane listened to Ryan's story with fake concern, making sympathetic noises while secretly celebrating inside. Her plan had worked perfectly, and Ryan's career was now in ruins. But she wasn't done with him yet. As Ryan continued to rant about how his life was falling apart, Jane prepared to deliver the final blow that would complete her revenge and expose the truth about what kind of person Ryan really was. Jane let Ryan finish his angry phone call, listening to him blame everyone except himself for what had happened. He was convinced that someone at work was sabotaging him, and he kept asking Jane if she thought his coworkers were jealous of his success. Jane almost laughed at how clueless Ryan was about the real reason his life was crumbling around him. After Ryan hung up, Jane sat in her apartment for a few minutes, thinking about whether she should go through with the final part of her plan. She had already gotten her revenge by ruining his presentation and exposing his cheating to all the women he had been lying to. But then Jane remembered all the cruel things Ryan had said about her to his friends, and she decided that he deserved to face the full consequences of his actions. Jane opened her laptop and began typing a detailed post for Reddit. She had been planning this moment for days, and she wanted to make sure she told the story in a way that would get maximum attention and support from other users. Jane titled her post, "My cheating boyfriend called me gullible, so I destroyed his career and exposed him to everyone." In her Reddit post, Jane explained everything that had happened from the beginning. She wrote about how Ryan had been the perfect boyfriend at first, but then became distant and secretive. She described catching him cheating with a redhead woman and discovering all of his cruel messages about her on his laptop. Jane included screenshots of some of Ryan's most offensive messages, making sure to block out any personal information that could identify the other women involved. She showed Reddit users how Ryan had bragged about manipulating her and using her kindness against her. She also explained how he had shared her private photos with his friends without her permission. But the part of Jane's post that really got people's attention was when she described her revenge plan. She explained how she had systematically exposed Ryan's lies to all the women he had been cheating with, and how she had sabotaged his career-defining presentation by editing his slides. Jane wrote, "I know some people might think I went too far, but this man treated me like I was worthless while I was nothing but kind and loving to him. He made fun of my trust and generosity to his friends, and he violated my privacy by sharing my personal photos. I decided that if Ryan wanted to play games with people's hearts, then he needed to learn that actions have consequences." Jane posted her story late Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning it had already received hundreds of upvotes and comments. Reddit users were fascinated by Jane's detailed revenge plan and impressed by how carefully she had executed it. Most people were supportive of what Jane had done, saying that Ryan had gotten exactly what he deserved. The comment section was filled with people sharing their own stories about cheating partners and praising Jane for standing up for herself. Several users commented that they wished they had been as brave as Jane when they were in similar situations. One comment that really stood out to Jane said, "You didn't just get revenge on your cheating boyfriend. You probably saved other women from going through the same pain you experienced." Ryan sounds like a serial manipulator who would have kept hurting people if you hadn't exposed him. By Thursday afternoon, Jane's Reddit post had been shared thousands of times and had made it to the front page of the website. People were screenshot parts of her story and sharing them on other social media platforms. Jane had never expected her post to get so much attention, but she was glad that people were supporting her decision to fight back. Meanwhile, Ryan's life continued to spiral out of control. Jane learned from mutual friends that Ryan had been fired from his job at the car dealership. His boss had told him that the company couldn't afford to keep an employee who had embarrassed them in front of such an important client. The HR department had also opened an investigation into Ryan's inappropriate behavior with female coworkers. Ashley, the redhead woman Jane had seen at Ryan's apartment, had also decided to get her own revenge on Ryan. She had posted about his cheating on her own social media accounts, tagging Ryan and exposing his lies to all of his friends and family members. Ashley's posts had been shared by dozens of people who knew Ryan, and he was now dealing with angry messages from people who had trusted him. Jane also discovered that several of Ryan's college friends had distanced themselves from him after learning about how he had been treating women. The group chat where Ryan had bragged about manipulating Jane had been screenshot and shared with other people from their college, and many of his old classmates were disgusted by his behavior. On Friday morning, Jane received a text message from Ryan that was completely different from his previous angry calls. This time, Ryan was begging Jane to meet him so he could explain himself and ask for her forgiveness. He claimed that he had made terrible mistakes and that he wanted to make things right between them. Jane stared at Ryan's desperate message for a long time, remembering how he had made her feel crazy for suspecting that something was wrong with their relationship. She thought about all the nights she had spent crying and wondering what she had done wrong, while Ryan had been laughing about her with his friends. Jane decided to meet Ryan one final time, but not for the reasons he was hoping for. She wanted to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what she thought of him and his behavior. She also wanted to make sure he understood that his actions had consequences and that he couldn't just charm his way out of the mess he had created. They met at the same coffee shop where they had first started talking 8 months earlier. Ryan looked terrible. His hair was messy, he had dark circles under his eyes, and he kept fidgeting with his hands like he was nervous. Jane almost felt sorry for him until she remembered the message where he had called her gullible and bragged about using her. Ryan immediately started apologizing and trying to explain his behavior. He claimed that he had been confused about his feelings and had made mistakes that he deeply regretted. He said that losing Jane had made him realize how much he truly cared about her, and he begged her to give him another chance to prove that he could change. Jane listened to Ryan's pathetic speech without saying a word. When he finished talking, she looked him directly in the eyes and said, "Ryan, I know about everything. I know about Ashley, I know about all the other women you were talking to, and I know about the cruel things you said about me to your friends. I also know that you were planning to dump me anyway, so please don't insult my intelligence by pretending that you actually care about me." Ryan's face went completely white when Jane said this. He started stammering and asking how she knew about those things, but Jane just smiled and continued talking. "You called me gullible, but you were wrong about that. I'm not gullible, I'm just kind. There's a big difference between those two things. I trusted you because I'm a good person who believes in treating others with respect and honesty. You took advantage of my kindness because you're a selfish person who only cares about yourself." Jane stood up from her chair and looked down at Ryan, who was now staring at the table with tears in his eyes. She felt a sense of satisfaction and closure that she had never experienced before. "I want you to know that everything that happened to you this week was a direct result of your own choices and actions. You lost your job, your friends, and your reputation because you decided to lie, cheat, and hurt people who cared about you. I didn't destroy your life, Ryan. You did that all by yourself." As Jane walked toward the door of the coffee shop, she turned back one final time and said, "I hope you learn from this experience and become a better person. But that's not my responsibility anymore. From now on, you're going to have to live with the consequences of treating people badly." Jane left the coffee shop feeling lighter and more confident than she had in months. She had gotten justice for herself and had shown Ryan that nice people aren't weak people. They're just people who choose to be kind until someone gives them a reason not to be. In the weeks following her confrontation with Ryan, Jane's life began to change in ways she had never expected. Her Reddit post had become one of the most popular revenge stories on the platform, with over 50,000 upvotes and thousands of comments from people who had been inspired by her courage to stand up for herself. Jane started receiving private messages from women all over the world who had been through similar experiences with cheating partners. Many of them thanked her for sharing her story and said that reading about her revenge had given them the strength to leave their own toxic relationships. Some women even asked Jane for advice on how to handle their own situations with dishonest boyfriends. One message that particularly touched Jane's heart came from a 22-year-old college student named Maria who lived in Texas. Maria wrote, "Your story helped me realize that I deserve better than a boyfriend who lies to me and makes me feel crazy for asking questions. I broke up with him yesterday, and I feel free for the first time in months. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to fight back when someone treats you badly." Jane realized that her story had done more than just get revenge on Ryan. It had actually helped other people recognize their own worth and find the courage to demand better treatment from their partners. This gave Jane a sense of purpose and satisfaction that went far beyond the personal justice she had achieved. At work, Jane's coworkers had started treating her differently too. Word had somehow gotten around the office about what had happened with Ryan, and instead of feeling embarrassed, Jane found that people respected her for how she had handled the situation. Her boss even complimented her on her problem-solving skills and gave her a small promotion with a raise of $5,000 per year. Jane's friends were also amazed by the transformation they saw in her. Her best friend, Rachel, told her, "I've never seen you stand up for yourself like this before. You've always been so sweet and forgiving, but now you seem stronger and more confident. It's like you finally realized how amazing you are." Meanwhile, Ryan's life had continued to spiral downward. Jane heard through mutual friends that he had been forced to move back in with his parents because he couldn't afford his apartment rent after losing his job. He had also been struggling to find new employment because several potential employers had found his Reddit story during background checks. Ashley, the redhead woman, had started dating someone new and had posted photos of herself looking happy and confident on social media. She had also left a comment on Jane's Reddit post thanking her for exposing Ryan's lies and saying that she was grateful to have dodged a bullet. Most of Ryan's college friends had completely cut him off after learning about his behavior. The group chat where he had bragged about manipulating women had been disbanded, and several of his former buddies had publicly apologized to Jane on social media for not speaking up sooner about Ryan's character. Jane learned that Ryan had tried to create his own Reddit account to defend himself and tell his side of the story, but his post had been immediately downvoted and filled with comments from people calling him out for his behavior. He had eventually deleted the post and his account after receiving hundreds of negative messages. 3 months after the coffee shop confrontation, Jane was surprised to receive a handwritten letter from Ryan in her mailbox. In the letter, Ryan admitted that he had been completely wrong about everything and that he finally understood how much pain he had caused her and other women. Ryan wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that what happened has forced me to take a hard look at myself and my behavior. I've started going to therapy to understand why I treated people so badly, and I'm working on becoming a better person. I'm not asking you to forgive me or give me another chance. I just wanted you to know that your actions helped me realize that I needed to change." Jane read Ryan's letter twice before deciding to throw it away. She appreciated that he seemed to be taking responsibility for his actions, but she didn't feel like she owed him any response or forgiveness. Ryan's journey to become a better person was his own responsibility, and Jane had already moved on with her life. A few months later, Jane met someone new at a bookstore downtown. His name was David, and he was a teacher who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends. David was kind, honest, and genuinely interested in getting to know Jane as a person. He never pressured her or made her feel like she had to prove herself to him. When Jane told David about what had happened with Ryan, he was supportive and impressed by how she had handled the situation. David said, "You didn't just get revenge. You stood up for yourself and probably protected other women from going through the same thing. That takes real strength and courage." Jane's relationship with David developed slowly and naturally. He was patient with her trust issues and never gave her any reason to doubt his honesty or commitment. David encouraged Jane to continue sharing her story with other women who needed to hear it, and he was proud of the positive impact she was having on people's lives. 1 year after the Reddit post, Jane decided to write a follow-up story about what had happened in her life since her revenge on Ryan. She wanted to let people know that standing up for yourself doesn't just feel good in the moment. It can actually change your entire life for the better. In her follow-up post, Jane wrote, "I learned that being kind doesn't mean being weak, and being strong doesn't mean being cruel. You can be a good person who treats others with respect while still demanding that same respect in return. Don't let anyone convince you that you deserve to be treated badly just because you're nice." Jane's follow-up post was just as popular as her original story, and she received hundreds of messages from people who had been inspired to make positive changes in their own lives. Several women had left abusive relationships, others had stood up to bullies at work, and many had simply learned to value themselves more highly. Jane also started a blog where she shared advice about relationships, self-respect, and standing up for yourself. Her blog became popular among young women who were learning to navigate dating and relationships in a world where not everyone has good intentions. Looking back on everything that had happened, Jane realized that Ryan's betrayal had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced her to discover her own strength and had taught her that she didn't need to accept poor treatment from anyone. She had learned that sometimes the best revenge is not just getting back at someone who hurt you, but becoming a better and stronger version of yourself. Jane's story had become a reminder to people everywhere that actions have consequences, and that treating others with kindness and respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. Because you never know when someone you've underestimated might surprise you with just how powerful they can be when they decide to fight back. As Jane sat in her apartment one evening, reading thank you messages from women who had been helped by her story, she smiled and thought about how different her life had become. She had gone from being a victim of someone else's cruelty to being a source of strength and inspiration for others. And that, Jane realized, was the sweetest revenge of all, using her pain to help others and turning her worst experience into something that made the world a little bit better.